The grand hall of the Zyrexian Empire was filled with tension. The galactic war games had just ended, and the victorious warrior, Valkyra, stood before the High Council. She was a towering figure, her deep violet skin gleaming under the bright lights, her sharp golden eyes scanning the room with an air of confidence. The Zyrexians were a proud and battle-hardened species, known for their strength and ruthless combat skills. As tradition dictated, the champion was allowed to choose any prize: wealth, technology, land, even a starship. The entire galaxy waited in silence for Valkyra's decision. "I claim my prize," she said, her voice sharp and unwavering. The High Chancellor, a wrinkled Zyrexian elder, nodded. "State your wish, warrior." The crowd leaned in, eager to hear her choice. Would she take the legendary fire blade of Ragnar? Perhaps a fleet of warships? Valkyra smirked and pointed a clawed finger toward the delegation from Earth. "I demand a human as my prize." Gasps echoed through the hall. Even the Chancellor's eyes widened. Humans were one of the youngest species in the galactic community. They were weaker than most alien races, fragile, slow, and physically unimpressive compared to warriors like the Zyrexians or the Dranics. Whispers spread like wildfire. A human? Why would she want one of them? Surely, this is some kind of joke. The representatives from Earth exchanged nervous glances. Then one of them stepped forward. Daniel Carter, a former soldier turned engineer. His brown hair was slightly unkempt, and his olive-green eyes scanned the room with caution. Unlike the aliens, he wasn't wearing battle armor, just a simple jacket and cargo pants. Daniel frowned. "Excuse me?" Valkyra crossed her arms, amused by his reaction. "You heard me, human. You are my prize." Daniel's face twisted in disbelief. "I'm not an object. You can't just claim me like a trophy." The High Chancellor cleared his throat. "Warrior Valkyra, humans are independent beings. They are not slaves, nor property to be given as rewards." Valkyra chuckled. "I do not ask for a slave. I demand a companion, a human to stand by my side." The room fell into stunned silence. A Zyrexian warrior choosing a human as a companion. It was unheard of. Daniel folded his arms. "Why me? Of all things, why would you choose a human?" Valkyra's golden eyes gleamed with something unreadable. "You'll find out soon enough, human." The High Council debated for what felt like an eternity. Finally, the Chancellor sighed. By the rules of the war games, her request must be honored. If the human accepts. Daniel looked around. Every eye was on him. Humans, Zyrexians, and countless other alien species. He exhaled sharply. He didn't trust this alien warrior, but something in her eyes told him this wasn't just some random demand. Against his better judgment, he nodded. "I accept." Valkyra smirked. "Then prepare yourself, human. Your life is about to change forever." Daniel Carter sat in the corner of the massive Zyrexian warship, arms crossed, staring at the alien warriors around him. The ship, Sundering Fang, was larger than anything he had ever seen. Its metallic walls hummed with energy, and strange, glowing symbols pulsed along the corridors. He still couldn't believe what had happened. One moment, he was watching the galactic war games, and the next, he had been claimed as a prize by Valkyra, the Zyrexian champion. And now, he was on her ship, flying toward an unknown destination. Valkyra stood nearby, her sharp golden eyes watching him with amusement. She was taller than him, built like a warrior, but she moved with an elegance that reminded him of a predator studying its prey. Daniel sighed and finally spoke. "All right, enough games. What do you really want from me?" Valkyra smirked. "I already told you. You are my chosen companion." Daniel scoffed. "Companion? That sounds a lot like prisoner to me." One of the Zyrexian guards growled, stepping forward. "You will show respect to our champion, human." Daniel didn't flinch. He had fought in wars before, faced death more times than he could count. A giant alien warrior didn't scare him. Vakira raised a hand, stopping the guard. Let him speak. Humans are not like the others. They do not submit so easily. Daniel narrowed his eyes. Dan right, we don't. Vakira stepped closer, towering over him. Good, that is exactly why I chose you. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? She leaned in slightly. You think this galaxy sees your kind as weak, don't you? Daniel shrugged. Compared to most alien species. Yeah, we kind of are. Vakira chuckled. Wrong. Humans are resilient. You survive where others fall. You adapt, think fast, and never surrender. That is why I need you by my side. Daniel stared at her. For the first time, there was no mockery in her voice, only cold truth. But that didn't mean he was just going to accept this. That's a nice speech, he said, standing up. But I'm not a warrior, Vakira. I'm an engineer. If you wanted a fighter, you picked the wrong guy. Vakira grinned. Did I? Before he could react, she swung her arm at him. Fast. Daniel barely dodged in time, stumbling back. His instincts kicked in, and he immediately went into defensive mode, looking for a way out. Vakira laughed. Good reflexes. You say you are not a warrior, yet you move like one. Daniel clenched his fists. What the hell is your game, Vakira? She folded her arms. No game, human. You are here to prove yourself, to me, to my crew, and maybe, to yourself. Daniel scowled. This was not going to be easy. One thing was clear, he wasn't just a prize. He was part of something much bigger. Daniel Carter had been on Sundering Fang for only a few hours, but it already felt like days. The massive Zyrexian warship was unlike anything he had ever seen. The corridors stretched endlessly, filled with alien technology, flickering energy panels, and towering warriors who looked at him like he didn't belong. And they weren't wrong. He still had no idea why Vakira had chosen him. She kept saying she needed a human companion. But what did that even mean? Daniel wasn't about to sit around waiting for answers. He needed to figure out what was going on. He walked through the dimly lit corridors, keeping an eye on the warriors around him. Some sneered, others ignored him, but a few watched him carefully, as if studying his every move. Just great, he thought. I'm stuck on a warship full of aliens who probably think I'm weak. Then he heard voices. He stopped near an open doorway, pressing himself against the cold metal wall. Inside, two Zyrexian officers were speaking in hushed tones. He is unworthy, one said, voice filled with disgust. A fragile human cannot stand among us. Vakira's voice cut through the room like a blade. You underestimate him. That is your first mistake. Daniel's eyes narrowed. She was defending him. The other officer growled. But why, champion? Of all things, why claim a human? There was silence. For a moment, Daniel thought Vakira wouldn't answer. Then her voice came again, lower, more serious. The prophecy. Daniel frowned. Prophecy? What prophecy? The officer scoffed. Surely, you don't believe in that old legend. Vakira's tone remained calm. Belief is irrelevant. The facts remain. Human ingenuity is unlike anything in this galaxy. They win wars they should lose. They survive impossible odds. The council may laugh, but I know better. Daniel's heart pounded. What the hell was she talking about? He stepped away from the door, mind racing. A prophecy. About humans. He didn't have time to think before Vakira appeared in the hallway, arms crossed, golden eyes locked on him. Enjoying the conversation, human? She asked, amused. Daniel sighed. Not really, but I'd like some answers. Vakira tilted her head. Wouldn't we all? He stepped forward. Enough games, Vakira. Why am I here? And what's this prophecy about humans? She studied him for a long moment, then smirked. Patience, Daniel. You will understand soon. Daniel clenched his jaw. He hated cryptic answers. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about a warrior choosing a prize. Something bigger was happening, and Daniel had a feeling that whatever it was, he wasn't going to like it. The next day, Daniel found himself standing in a large training room, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was filled with strange, glowing weapons and Zyrexian warriors practicing their combat moves. Daniel felt completely out of place. These were battle-hardened soldiers, huge, armored, and quick. He was just a guy with a background in engineering. He'd never been in real combat. But there he was, about to face off with one of them. Valkyra stood beside him, arms crossed, her eyes sharp and focused. She seemed amused by his nervousness, but Daniel wasn't here to please her. He was here to survive. "You are going to fight," she said, her voice cool. "Show me you are worthy of standing by my side." Daniel shot her a glare. "I already told you, I'm not a fighter." Valkyra raised an eyebrow. "Then prove me wrong." Without another word, she signaled for a Zyrexian warrior to step forward. The soldier, who looked like he could crush Daniel with a single punch, grinned at him. His black armor gleamed, and his muscles bulged under the weight of his weapon. "Begin," Valkyra said simply. The warrior lunged, swinging his blade with incredible speed. Daniel barely had time to react. His instincts kicked in, and he dodged, rolling out of the way just in time. His heart was racing. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep this up. The warrior came at him again, this time faster, with a series of deadly strikes. Daniel ducked, weaving around the blows. He wasn't strong enough to take the hits, so he had to rely on his speed. "Not bad," Valkyra's voice echoed through the room. "But speed alone won't save you." Daniel barely heard her over the sound of his heartbeat pounding in his ears. The warrior swung again, and Daniel knew he couldn't keep dodging forever. He needed to fight back. He glanced around quickly and saw a training spear lying on the floor nearby. He grabbed it and swung it just as the warrior attacked again. The spear connected with the soldier's arm, knocking him back. The Zyrexian warrior blinked, clearly surprised. He hadn't expected Daniel to land a hit. Daniel took advantage of the moment, striking again, this time aiming for the warrior's legs. The soldier staggered, losing his balance. Daniel didn't hesitate. He charged, using every ounce of his body's strength to push the warrior down. It wasn't a perfect move. It wasn't anything a Zyrexian would have done, but it worked. The soldier hit the floor with a loud thud. Valkyra stepped forward, her golden eyes gleaming. "Impressive. You actually managed to defeat him." Daniel stood, breathing heavily, his muscles aching. "That's it. I just needed to hit him once." She smiled, her lips curling into a proud grin. "It's not about brute strength. It's about thinking fast, adapting, and finding the right moment." Daniel exhaled, feeling the weight of the battle lift from his shoulders. He hadn't expected to win, but now he realized that survival wasn't just about fighting. It was about thinking like a human, using what he had, not what he lacked. The Zyrexian warrior slowly stood, rubbing his head. "You were lucky," he muttered, though there was respect in his tone. Valkyra nodded. "That's the thing about humans. They know how to make their own luck." Daniel felt a flicker of pride. Maybe he wasn't as useless as he thought. But he knew this was only the beginning. There was still a long way to go before he understood why he was here. The days blurred together as Daniel settled into life aboard the Sundering Fang. But one thing had become clear. Valkyra's demand for a human companion wasn't just a strange request. It was part of something much larger. Despite his growing respect for her and the warriors on board, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he was still in the dark about the real reason he was here. Valkyra had been cryptic, offering only bits and pieces of information. But now, as the warship hurtled through space, he could feel the tension building. One evening, Daniel was walking through the ship's corridors when he overheard voices, quiet at first, but loud enough to catch his attention. He stopped outside a door and pressed himself against the cold, metal wall, trying to stay unnoticed. The Dranex are preparing for a full assault, one of the Zyrexian officers said, his voice low but urgent. We must be ready. The Dranex. Daniel whispered under his breath. He had heard the name before. The Dranex Dominion. A powerful and brutal alien faction known for their conquest and cruelty. They had fought with the Zyrexians in the past, but their recent buildup had been concerning. Valkyra has ordered the ship to be prepared. Another voice replied. But can we survive this time? The first officer growled. Zyrexians have faced worse, but the Dranex, they are relentless. The numbers are too great. Daniel's pulse quickened. Numbers. That meant they were outmatched. But there had to be a way. There always was. He couldn't just stand there. He had to know what was going on, what his role was in all of this. The door opened suddenly, and Valkyra emerged, her eyes locking onto his in an instant. Listening in, human? She asked, her voice calm but sharp. Daniel didn't flinch. I heard enough. The Dranex are coming. Valkyra nodded, her expression unreadable. They are indeed, and they are our greatest threat yet. Then why me? Daniel blurted. I'm not a warrior. I can't fight like you can. Why do you need me? Valkyra studied him for a moment before stepping closer. Her golden eyes seemed to pierce through him, as if she was seeing something he couldn't understand. You are not here to fight like us. You are here to help us survive. We need your human ingenuity, Daniel. Your ability to think beyond strength. Daniel felt a knot tighten in his stomach. I still don't understand. She sighed, looking away for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. The Dranex are planning an attack, but they are predictable in their strategy. They believe we will fight them head-on, which is exactly what they want. They are not prepared for a human mind to outsmart them. Daniel's heart raced. Wait, you want me to outthink the Dranex? Valkyra smiled, a small but proud grin. Exactly. Daniel felt his confidence build. He wasn't a soldier, but he was an engineer. He could think in ways the Dranex never would. He could build, adapt, strategize. He wasn't just a prize anymore. He had a purpose. Valkyra turned toward the bridge, signaling for him to follow. Come, human. I want you to start thinking of ways to turn the tide. The war is far from over. Daniel walked beside her, his mind racing. It was clear now. He wasn't here by accident. He had a role to play, and it wasn't going to be easy. But if he could help save these people, maybe, just maybe, he'd finally understand why Valkyra had chosen him. As they walked, the reality of what was to come hit him. The Dranex Dominion wasn't just an enemy. It was a death sentence waiting to happen. And if they were going to survive, it would take everything he had. But for the first time since he'd been dragged onto this ship, Daniel felt something stir inside him. Hope. The war was coming. Daniel could feel it in the air, thick with tension and dread. The crew of the Sundering Fang was preparing for battle, but Daniel was still grappling with the fact that he was supposed to play a role in all of this. How was a human engineer supposed to outsmart an entire alien fleet? For the past 2 days, he'd spent his time studying the Dranex, their tactics, their ships, their weaknesses. But it wasn't enough. He needed a breakthrough, something that would give the Zyrexians a fighting chance. Daniel sat in the ship's strategy room, his mind racing as he pored over data on the Dranex fleet. The room was silent except for the soft hum of computers, the flickering of holographic maps, and the occasional voice of a passing officer. Valkyra entered, her footsteps echoing off the metal floor. She didn't say anything at first, just stood behind him, watching. Anything? She asked, her voice a mix of patience and urgency. Daniel shook his head. Not yet. I need more time. She leaned over his shoulder, her sharp eyes scanning the holographic displays. The time is not on our side, human. The Dranex are already moving toward us. They will strike within the next 24 hours. Daniel felt a wave of pressure wash over him. He didn't have the luxury of time. But he wasn't about to give up. He needed to think like a human, outsmart them. He had one advantage the Dranics didn't: the ability to think outside the box. A thought suddenly crossed his mind. It wasn't much, but it was something. Wait, what if we don't fight them directly? Vakira's eyebrow raised, intrigued. What do you mean? We don't engage them head-on like they expect. What if we disrupt their fleet, confuse them, make them think they're under attack from all sides? Vakira studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Continue. Daniel leaned forward, tapping on the display. The Dranics rely heavily on their fleet formation. If we can mess with their sensors, disable their communication systems, they won't be able to coordinate. We can create false signals, simulate an attack from another direction. Vakira folded her arms, considering the plan. It could work, but how do we get close enough to disrupt their systems without being destroyed in the process? Daniel looked at her, meeting her golden eyes. I can build a decoy system, something small, fast, and nearly undetectable. We send it in, and it starts sending false signals. The Dranics will think they're under attack, and that will throw their whole strategy off. Vakira's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a smile. Clever. You would place the decoy at the heart of their fleet. Daniel nodded. Exactly. It'll be risky, but it'll give us a chance. She stepped back, looking him over, and for the first time, Daniel saw genuine respect in her gaze. This is why I chose you, human. A shiver ran down Daniel's spine at her words. He had never imagined that he, a simple human, could be the key to saving an entire species. But this was no time for doubts. There was no turning back now. Vakira's voice broke through his thoughts. I'll gather the crew. We'll need to act quickly. Daniel stood, his body tense with anticipation. He was about to play a part in something bigger than he had ever imagined. And if this worked, it could change the fate of the entire galaxy. The tension in the warship was palpable. The crew of the Sundering Fang was working at full speed, preparing for the dangerous mission Daniel had proposed. Every officer, every soldier, knew that if the Dranics fleet arrived before they could execute their plan, it would be a disaster. But Daniel had convinced Vakira. This was their best chance. The ship's engineers worked tirelessly to build the decoy system. Daniel oversaw the construction, making sure it would be small, stealthy, and capable of sending out false signals to confuse the Dranics. Every detail had to be perfect. They had no room for mistakes. As the clock ticked down, Daniel found himself in the ship's cockpit, staring at the vast expanse of space outside. The Dranics fleet was getting closer, and he could feel the weight of the moment. If the decoy failed, there would be no backup. They were outmatched, outgunned, and out of time. Vakira appeared behind him, her voice calm but urgent. We're ready, human. Are you? Daniel turned to face her. His palms were sweating, his mind racing. I'm ready, he said, even though doubt lingered in the back of his mind. They had no other choice. This had to work. Vakira studied him for a moment, then nodded. We'll launch the decoy, but once it's in motion, there's no going back. The Dranics will react quickly. You have one shot. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. One shot. He felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The only way to win was to take risks, to think like a human. We're launching, the communications officer said, his voice tense. All systems are green. The decoy is ready. Vakira turned to Daniel. You know what to do. Daniel nodded, swallowing hard. The decoy, a small, modified probe, was now ready to be sent into the heart of the Dranics fleet. If it worked, it would disrupt their sensors and communication systems, making the Dranics believe they were under attack from multiple directions. The decoy was designed to send out fake distress signals, throwing the Dranics into confusion, and buying the Zyrexians the time they desperately needed. Launch the decoy, Daniel said, his voice steady. The command was given, and the decoy shot off from the Sundering Fang, disappearing into the vastness of space. Daniel's eyes never left the screen as the probe began its journey toward the Dranex fleet. For a few moments, nothing happened. The silence was almost suffocating. Then, the first of the Dranex ships responded. A signal flashed across the monitor, and then another. The Dranex were reacting just as they had predicted, panicked, disoriented, unable to tell which signals were real. Yes, Daniel muttered under his breath. But it was far from over. He knew the Dranex would soon realize the ruse, and they wouldn't hesitate to retaliate. Valkyra stood behind him, her posture tense. "You've done your part, human. Now, we wait." Daniel's fingers hovered over the controls, his body tense, ready to act at a moment's notice. The decoy had bought them time, but the Dranex fleet was not so easily fooled. They would adapt. Suddenly, the ship's alarms blared. The Dranex had figured it out. The game was far from over. The alarms on the Sundering Fang screamed through the ship as the Dranex fleet began to regroup. The decoy had bought them a few precious minutes, but the enemy was too quick, too smart. The Dranex were no fools. They had figured out the ruse, and now they were adapting. Daniel's hands were shaking as he stared at the monitor. The Dranex ships were now maneuvering with purpose, clearly searching for the source of the disturbance. He had only bought them time, not an actual victory. His heart pounded in his chest as he watched the enemy fleet close in, their massive ships lined up like predators circling their prey. Valkyra stood behind him, her golden eyes sharp as ever. "We knew they would figure it out eventually," she said, her voice calm but with a dangerous edge. "Now we need to act quickly." Daniel nodded, trying to steady his breath. "What's the next step?" Valkyra was already moving, barking orders to the crew. "We'll send out another wave of false signals. Disrupt their communications again. And this time, we'll hit them where it hurts, their engines. If we can disable their propulsion, we'll have them cornered." Daniel's mind raced. It was risky, too risky, but there was no other option. He had to help them, even if it meant putting everything on the line. "Get me a schematic of their ships," Daniel said, turning to the engineering officer. "We need to find a weak spot, a place where they haven't shielded their systems completely." The officer nodded quickly, bringing up a map of the Dranex ships on the screen. Daniel studied it carefully, his mind working fast. The engines were the key. They had to disable them. But where? "Here," he said suddenly, pointing to a section of one of the larger Dranex ships. "Their engines are heavily shielded, but there's a small unshielded area near the lower hull. If we can target it with a precise shot, we can knock out their propulsion systems." Valkyra looked at him, a glint of respect in her eyes. "Are you sure it will work?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted, "but it's the only chance we've got." Without hesitation, Valkyra nodded. "Do it." Daniel moved quickly, instructing the crew to prepare the weapon systems. As the ship's cannons powered up, he felt a strange calm settle over him. He wasn't a soldier, but in that moment, he felt more like one than ever before. This wasn't just about survival. It was about making a difference. The shot was fired. A beam of energy shot out from the Sundering Fang, aimed directly at the unshielded spot on the Dranex ship. The beam hit its target, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then the Dranex ship shuddered, and a massive explosion tore through its lower hull. The engines were disabled. "Direct hit," someone shouted from the control room. Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. The decoy, the false signals, the engine strike. It had all worked. The Dranex fleet was thrown into chaos. They were crippled, and the Zyrexians now had the upper hand. The crew erupted in cheers. Valkyra walked over to Daniel, a look of approval in her eyes. "You did it, human." Daniel stood there, stunned. It hadn't been easy, and there were still more battles to fight, but for the first time since he'd arrived on the Sundering Fang, Daniel felt like he had earned his place. "I guess I'm not just a prize after all," he said with a grin. Valkyra smirked. "No, you're more than that." Daniel didn't need her to say anything more. He had done what he came here to do. He had changed the course of the battle, and in doing so, he had proven to everyone, and himself, that humans had something to offer in the vastness of the galaxy. And for the first time since the war began, he felt like a hero. The battle was not over, but for the first time since the Dranex fleet had appeared, the crew of the Sundering Fang felt a glimmer of hope. The decoy plan had worked. The Dranex ships were in disarray, and their engines had been disabled. The Zyrexian warriors, bolstered by this unexpected victory, pushed forward with renewed confidence. Daniel stood at the edge of the command deck, watching the chaotic battle unfold before him. The ship's cannons fired, sending waves of energy toward the remaining Dranex ships, but his mind was still buzzing with questions. Why had Valkyra chosen him? What was her real reason for bringing him here? He had done what she asked. He had outsmarted the Dranex, bought the Zyrexians enough time to win this battle, but he still didn't understand why he, of all people, had been chosen for this. Valkyra walked up beside him, her eyes scanning the battle. "You've proven yourself, human, more than I expected." Daniel glanced at her. "I'm still not sure what I'm doing here. Why did you pick me?" Valkyra's golden eyes softened, though her expression remained serious. "I have my reasons, and now I can finally tell you the truth." Daniel looked at her, waiting for an answer. "The prophecy," Valkyra began. "Long ago, it was written that a human would help us win a war we could not win. The Zyrexian people have always been strong, but we are a warrior race. We think in terms of strength, of battle. But we are predictable. We rely too much on our power, and it has cost us many times. Our greatest weakness is thinking we can solve everything with force." Daniel's eyes widened. "A prophecy? About humans?" Valkyra nodded. "Yes. But it was not just about any human. It was about the right human. One who could think differently. One who could show us how to outsmart our enemies. It had to be someone like you, Daniel. Someone who doesn't rely on strength alone but uses ingenuity, adaptability, and the ability to think under pressure." Daniel's mind spun. He was just an ordinary guy from Earth. He didn't feel like he was anything special, yet here he was, part of a prophecy that was shaping the future of an entire species. "So, you knew this whole time that I was part of the prophecy?" Daniel asked. Valkyra met his gaze, her eyes steady. "I didn't know for sure, but I had my suspicions. Humans have always been underestimated by other species, but I studied your kind. You are resilient, Daniel. You survive against the odds. You adapt faster than anyone else, and I knew that the Zyrexians could use that." Daniel was quiet for a moment, absorbing what she had said. He felt a mix of disbelief and something else. Pride. This was bigger than anything he had ever imagined. "But why me?" he asked again. "There must have been others who were better suited for this." Valkyra shook her head. "I chose you because I saw what others didn't. You are different, Daniel. You think outside the box. In every test I gave you, you found a way. You didn't follow the rules. You rewrote them. And that is what I needed." Daniel felt a knot in his chest loosen. It was hard to believe, but somehow, everything she said made sense. He wasn't just a random choice. He was meant to be here. "I didn't ask for this," Daniel said quietly, looking out at the battle unfolding before them. "But I guess I'm glad I'm here." Valkyra placed a hand on his shoulder. "You may not have asked for it, but you earned it. And together, we will continue to fight." Daniel nodded. The battle wasn't over, but it had taken a turn. He wasn't just a human caught in the middle of an alien war. He was part of something bigger. The future of the Zyrexian people, and perhaps the galaxy, rested on their shoulders. And Daniel was ready to face whatever came next. The sound of the Sundering Fang's cannons firing echoed in the air as the battle continued to rage outside. The Dranex fleet was crippled, their ships now disorganized and weakened from the earlier attack. Daniel stood at the command deck, his hands clenched tightly around the railing. The situation wasn't over yet, but for the first time, he felt the weight of the moment, the weight of being part of something bigger than he had ever imagined. The Zyrexians were winning, but victory had not come easily. It had come because of a human, a regular, unassuming guy from Earth who had managed to outsmart a superior enemy with nothing more than his mind. Daniel glanced over at Vakira, who stood beside him, her golden eyes scanning the battlefield. She had been right. This wasn't just about brute force. It was about strategy, ingenuity, and adaptation. And Daniel had proven that he had what it took to stand by her side. "Your plan worked," Vakira said quietly, her voice filled with respect. Daniel nodded, still absorbing everything that had happened. The Draenei ships were retreating, their systems crippled beyond repair. The Zyrexians had emerged victorious, but it wasn't just about the battle. It was about what this victory meant for their future. Daniel had done what Vakira had asked. He had proven himself. But more than that, he had shown the Zyrexians something they hadn't understood before. Humans could change the tide of battle, not with strength, but with their minds. "You've earned your place here, Daniel," Vakira said, her tone softer than it had been before. "Not just in my ship, but in our history. The galaxy will remember the human who helped us win this war." Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. The honor was overwhelming, and yet he still couldn't fully understand the gravity of it all. He wasn't just a pawn in someone else's game anymore. He was a key player. "I didn't ask for this," Daniel said quietly, his voice almost lost in the hum of the ship's engines, "but I guess I'm starting to see why I'm here." Vakira smiled, a rare and genuine smile that softened her features. "We all have a purpose, human. You just had to discover yours." As they watched the Draenei's fleet retreat, the Sundering Fang moving steadily toward victory, Daniel realized that everything he had gone through, the battles, the uncertainty, the confusion, had led him to this moment. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about changing everything for the Zyrexians, and for himself. Vakira turned to him. "The galaxy will change now, Daniel. The future we build will be shaped by what we've done today." Daniel looked at her, then out at the stars. For the first time since he'd been brought aboard this alien ship, he felt a deep sense of belonging. He had done something meaningful. He had made a difference. "I'm ready," Daniel said, his voice steady and confident. Vakira nodded, her golden eyes gleaming with pride. "Then let's face the future together." The Sundering Fang sailed through the stars, its victory marked by the bravery of a single human who had changed the course of an entire war. And for Daniel Carter, this was just the beginning of a new future, one where humans, once thought weak, now stood tall beside the mightiest of the galaxy.